He turned and saw a strange face that seemed to shift, constantly changing. It was no longer clear. A blur of shapes flickered before his eyes, leaving only uncertainty behind. "You have learned much." The voice in his head was nearly deafening. He wondered if he was going insane. Visions were not a good thing. In history, they tended to get people killed or committed. "Learned much," he mused. "Yeah, if you count 7 years of being lost in mistakes as learning. That lot of good it does me." James' reply was sharp. He had had a plan tonight, and it didn't involve mystic spirits getting in the way of his future. Anger, an anger he had thought long buried, crashed into his mind. How dare this thing interfere with what he needed and wanted to do? For that chance, I'd do almost anything. James sighed, tears running down his cheeks. The hope that radiated from his heart was overwhelming. He could do it again. He could do it right. So, what if one little thing changed? The mere chance to would far outweigh any minor effect. "Let me go back." There was no other sound than the laughter that rang in his ears. The vision became brighter, swallowing his entire vision with a light that engulfed the room. There was a taste in his mouth of earth and of metal. A warmth permeated the back of his hands, and his whole body began to ache. The light turned to darkness, and James closed his eyes, hoping. The emotion filled his soul as he slipped into the black. The first thing that James noticed was the stiffness in the right side of his face. As he opened his eyes, the pull of the skin along his cheek caused slight discomfort when the scabs upon it tugged. Judging from the amount of hardness along his face, he realized he must have torn the flesh from at least half of it. He began to open his mouth, feeling the small scrapes of metal on the inside of his lips. Braces, twisted and protruding, which cut slightly into him. The discomfort was mild, but it served to sharpen his awareness. Gingerly, he brought a hand up to his face and ran it along the healing wounds. The slight contact did not hurt much, but it brought home the amount of injury he truly had. He noted with some distraction the small fore that was inserted into the back of his hand. Turning his attention away from himself, he looked about the room where he was. Across from the steel bed where he lay, a television mounted on the wall blared out some inane sitcom. About him, there were numerous tables, all with closed drawers. The walls were slightly off color and rough from what he could see. The floor too was white, but speckled with numerous flecks of some other material. Set against one wall, a doorway lay wide open, with a hallway beyond. It wasn't the nicest hospital James had ever been in, but it would pass muster. James turned his thoughts back to the last memories he had. He recalled drinking. Actually, he remembered drinking quite a bit. He hadn't driven or anything, had he? It took a moment before James remembered writing his farewell note. He sighed inwardly, realizing he must have messed that up too. Can't he do anything right? It was obvious what had happened. He must have taken the drugs, and they didn't do what he had hoped. He must have had his stomach pumped, and now here he was. He reflected a moment more. But that didn't make sense, his still slightly exhausted mind interjected. If he had tried to harm himself, he wouldn't be alone here. There would be a watch. Heck, they probably would have strapped him to the bed. And why the facial injuries? It didn't feel like burns, so the only way he could have gotten them is if someone had dragged him to the hospital by his face. James chuckled slightly at the thought of his overweight landlord trying to manhandle him to a car by dragging his legs. Not very likely. "Oh, you're up." The voice was his mother, and, oh God. The last thing he needed after an unsuccessful attempt was his mother. He waited for the reproach as he turned towards the door. "How are you feeling?" the young-looking woman at the door asked him. Young? James stared at his mother. At least she looked and sounded like her. The woman in her late 30s who looked back at him had an expression of concern on her face. There was no anger, just an affection and what seemed a sense of worry. His mother? James never remembered her looking that way. The woman he remembered was older, almost 50. It was a rare moment when she didn't criticize him, and the concern that this woman was showing was totally the opposite of that scorn. An instant or two went by before James finally realized that she was his mother, but she had gone through some radical transformation. She must have had one of those makeover shows do a number on her. That would probably explain her changed attitude as well. I'm okay, I guess. James mumbled. The drugs he had taken must have done a number on his vocal cords, or his hearing, because he could have sworn that the voice he answered her with was several notes higher than it should have been. Smiling at him, and moved into the room from the doorway. As she did so, James glanced over her form. She had obviously lost some weight, falling from the hefty woman size to the full-figured woman size. Her curly hair was worn a bit longer than she used to wear it, but the dark blonde coloration was the same. He noted with some distraction the lack of gray in her hair. She continued on, pulling up a metal chair with a plastic seat and sitting on it next to the bed. "That's nice, Han," and commented, her gaze moving up to the television that blared in the room. "What are you watching?" "I wasn't watching it. It was just on," James commented, unable to believe how good his mother was looking. It was like 10 years had been peeled off in an instant. "Good. Rots your brain," and replied, picking up the remote control and switching the set off. The silence in the room was a bit disconcerting, but he didn't comment. How much longer was she going to keep this up before she lowered the boom? "You look nice, Mom." James tried, a bit unsure of what to say. He knew there must be something wrong with his ears, because his voice still didn't sound right. There was a pause as Han looked at James. He waited for the lecture, mentally bracing himself for the load of crap she was about to dump on him. She took a deep breath, then spoke some words that shocked him. "I don't think you should go riding with Randall anymore." The comment was brief and said in such an offhand manner that James was momentarily dumbstruck. Randall? Her second husband, and he had never gotten along, even when they had gone out riding together. But they hadn't been riding together in years, ever since that one time. A flood of memories raced through James' mind. Images, neither real nor unreal, flashed before his eyes. A savage burning laughter that he would never forget. He glanced down at his hands again, past the 4, to truly look at them. The small scar on the back of his wrist that had been there from childhood was larger, no longer almost completely melded with the rest of the skin. The hair on his arm no longer was the deeper blonde that he remembered, but a thin light brown that covered considerably less. He was back in that hospital, 2 days after nearly harming himself on a motorcycle. His eyes widened, and a broad smile crossed his face. It hurt to smile like that, pulling hard on the scabs that coated his face, but he knew they would heal. He was back. He hadn't forgotten anything. He remembered it all, his life, Los Angeles, the Navy, college. Everything was there. What year was it? He had to remember. There was so much to do. He began to chuckle, and while it pained his body to do so, he had to laugh. "James, are you all right?" Anne's voice cut through his inner monologue, and she stared at him with a severe expression on her face. "I'm fine, Mom," he replied, trying unsuccessfully to wipe the smile off his face. He wasn't fine. He was better than fine. He had been given his life back, and he had no way to explain that to the woman in front of him. In fact, he reflected, I better not tell her. First thing that will get me is slapped right into the nearest mental institution. His mind whirled, trying to remember what he had said to her earlier question back in. God, he couldn't remember the year. He remembered that he hadn't gone out with Randall ever again, so he must have agreed with her. You're probably right about that, Mom. I don't know what I saw in motorcycles anyway. You got that right, he thought to himself. The last time you sat your ass on a motorcycle was at 16, and it left you right where you are now. I'm not saying you shouldn't ride, but I think that dirt bikes are a little too dangerous, honey. And continued. Her face smiled at him softly. James looked into her hazel eyes and nodded. Yeah, he agreed, leaning his head back into the pillow fully, and noting the long hair that pressed into the back of his head. Oh Lord, he mused, this must have been the year I wore my hair long. He swore a silent oath to get a haircut as soon as he got home. Maybe in a year or 2, you can get your license and try again, but I just don't think. She was reading a speech, James realized, shutting off his attention. He remembered how she would go on and on for the better part of forever. He nodded, not knowing what he had agreed to, but not really caring. His mind was occupied with his memories, trying to recall everything possible about what was going on. The year, damn it, let's see counting back. 1993. It had to be. The year he went off to college was the 93-94 school year. Shit. Idaho. What the heck was he going to do in Idaho? All they had up there was blue skies and farms. Hang on, it wasn't that bad. This was college, remember. Good news is that the doctor says you're healing a lot faster than normal for college. He could do it right this time. No more trying to hook up with everything that moved. Heck, he hadn't been successful the first time, since 19-year-old girls wanted nothing to do with a kid. 2 months from now. Better write off rush week, even though he recalled that it had probably been planned already. Well, he'd just have to cancel now, wouldn't he? No frat would be stupid enough to let a 16-year-old in. Although they're a bit concerned about some things that showed up in your CAT scan. At the thought of college girls, he found himself becoming slightly excited, a mild bulge beginning to form in his sheets. Shucks. James had forgotten how easily excited he had been at 16. He'd have to work doubly hard to not make the same mistakes he had before. Remember, buddy, he told himself, you didn't get laid the first time. Well, not willingly at any rate. Oh crap. Mental note, do not go to Delta Tau Delta party. Underline that one twice. He had no intention of losing his virginity to a guy the second time around. So we're going to have you stay here until they finish do the military again this time around? Why not? If he finished college at 18, he could be an officer at 19. Heck, he could probably get into the academy this time through, with what he remembered. Retirement at 39, with a nice fat severance package. So many potentials lost. Not an instant to waste. 2 months seemed like an eternity. Love you. James, I know that you're in a lot. Tests? The last few sentences that, and had spoken reverberated in his mind. He didn't remember staying for tests. Not after 2 days. So, I guess I'll let you rest. Call me if you need anything. And finished her statement and headed towards the door, pushing the small chair back into position. She closed the door behind her, leaving James alone in the silent room. Tests. Something about his CAT scan. Dear Lord, that vision didn't give me something bad, did it? James remembered those final burning words along with that laugh. One letter would be changed. Arg. Why did he have to be so clueless? It would be something debilitating, wouldn't it? It had to be. Something that destroyed his life without giving him the chance to live it right. Something like changing him to HIV. Didn't he have a canker sore on his mouth earlier? Oh God, canker to cancer. No, he touched his lips. He didn't have any of those. What else could it be though? He ran through the various combinations of his name, trying to find an embarrassing nickname made by changing one letter. Nothing jumped out at him. Well, whatever it was, he'd find out soon enough. James reached for the remote with his left hand and flipped the television on. On the screen, 4 people sat around trying to figure out a way to get into some girl's life. Oh yes, James thought. Some things, like primetime television, would never change. What on earth? He asked aloud, his hands touching his face where his injuries were mysteriously absent. Nobody heals that fast. Nobody. Oh, you're awake? A tall blonde woman in a nurse's smock looked in the door at the sound of his voice. I'll tell the doctor. She rapidly disappeared from view. James sighed, running his fingers through his hair, pushing it back from his eyes. Get a haircut, he reminded himself. He remembered wearing his hair long, but not to the middle of his back. He must have gotten a haircut soon after the accident. His contemplation was cut short by the arrival of the slight man in scrubs entering the room. He was tall, wearing a closely cropped beard under a pair of what James had referred to as birth control glasses in the Navy. There was a calm expression on his face as he walked towards the bed. Good morning, James. The doctor commented, looking not at James' face, but at his throat. There was a puzzled expression on the doctor's face, but he spoke calmly and quietly. I hope you slept well. Well enough. James replied, waiting for the shoe to drop. Doctors only spoke calmly and quietly when they wanted their patients to stay calm and quiet. From the expression on the doctor's face, he wanted James to stay calmer than a corpse. That's good, Jim. I'm Dr. Hubbard. The doctor paused a moment. You do like Jim, right? No, I hate Jim. James stated flatly, Jim is redneck with a shotgun and a case of beer. A hint of a smile crossed Hubbard's face before he resumed his calm expression. "All right, James, do you mind if I sit down? It's a free country." James replied, trying to remember that this man thought of him as 16. A little patronization was to be expected. The doctor pulled over the same chair that James' mother had occupied the night before and leaned back. He pulled up a clipboard that James had not noticed him carrying earlier. "I've already spoken with your mother, and she felt it was best if I filled you in on your condition." His voice was deathly calm, as if he was about to announce something serious. "Well, don't keep me in suspense," James stated sarcastically. He knew that the man was trying to spare his feelings, but James would be damned if he would wait any longer to find out what was wrong. "All right, James, first off, the good news. You're healing at a rate that is unbelievable. It seems to be slowing down a bit, but if it stays at the current rate, you should be in perfect health fairly soon. Your face has almost completely healed, with no scar tissue, which is very lucky indeed considering the depth of the abrasions. Your teeth have already become set in their positions, and you will be seeing your orthodontist to have your braces removed tomorrow. You're already ready to move, but we've kept you here because of some other problems. So, healing rapidly. Great. No more braces. Better." If the bad news wasn't too bad, James couldn't imagine a better life. One of the major problems of his social life, his braces, would be forever removed. James nodded at Hubbard with a smile on his face. Hubbard breathed heavily, but maintained his beatific expression. "Now the bad news. For some reason, you seem to have had a genetic, well, for lack of a better term, switch flipped. Your body is behaving, on a cellular level, as if you were a fetus." "What? That had to be wrong?" "That would explain the healing, though. However, he must have had his metabolism sped up to incredible levels." He glanced at the nearly empty floor near him and realized how many of them he had gone through in the last day. He recalled the nurse coming in at least 7 times to replace empty bags. "So, what, I'm going to die?" James asked, recalling that horrid disease, Hutchison something. The disease that made kids age rapidly at 10. It had something to do with metabolism. "No, James, and that's the interesting part. Everywhere the cells in your body have been replaced, like your face, the cells are behaving normally. It's strange, but our best guess is that when you've had every cell in your body replaced by new ones, you should return to your standard metabolism." "So, I guess I'll lose scar tissue," James stated, looking down at his hand. Indeed, the scar there seemed a bit less puffy and closer to the look it had when he was older. "I'm afraid that's not all," Hubbard explained, leaning a bit closer to James' reclining form. "I'm sorry, but there is an abnormality. Well, not really an abnormality, but a variation in the new cells. Please cut to the chase, Doc." James groaned, looking at the doctor with a sharp expression. "I don't need the long version." "Yes, you do. Now calm down, James. This is going to be very hard to explain." James merely nodded, his gaze fixed upon the doctor. "The new cells are identical to yours in all ways, with the exception of the 23rd chromosome pair. Have you taken much genetics in school?" "I'm not illiterate, Doc," James replied, a bit peeved. The 23rd chromosome pair is the only chromosome pair to vary in size and shape depending on the person's sex. In males, it is XY, and in females, XX. "Well, good, I'm glad you can save me some time." Dr. Hubbard's voice showed no sarcasm, just that same, infuriating calm. "So, I guess you can understand the implications when I tell you that every new cell in your body carries an XX chromosome pair." How on earth did that happen, James wondered. XX? That's the genetic marker for a female. Female? Oh my God. Now, James, I want you not to panic. I want you to realize that normally this would be a self-correcting failure of the genetic code. However, the problem is that your body is seeing your current cells as the error and is replacing them and not the variants. Replacing them with these, female cells? James tried to keep the fear out of his voice, but failed rather miserably. Yes, James. At the rate you're currently, healing, our best estimate is that every cell in your body will be replaced in about 1 month. But that won't change anything. James smiled. The vast majority of the human body's development occurs in the womb. Since he was already fully formed, He supposed the worst that could happen would be that he would only be able to father girls, since his testicles would be working from XX cells. That spirit tried to mess with the wrong person. James felt like crowing in triumph. He was back and it would work. One letter changed indeed. Such a pity that spirits didn't know about human development. I wish it was that simple. Dr. Hubbard's voice was calm. Normally you'd be correct, and it wouldn't change anything save a few minor characteristics, since your body is almost fully developed. However, as I said earlier, your body seems to have had another switch flipped. The one that tells cells to form organs, bones, etc. Combined with your speeded-up metabolism, I'm afraid that I have bad news. Bad news? James hadn't really been listening to the last statement. He was too busy congratulating himself for winning his bet with an ancient spirit. Yes, James, I'm afraid that, well, look. Feel your throat.